Everybody, my name is Payne, and I'm the founder and president of the Patriotic Millionaires. You can find more about the group at patrioticmillionaires.org. Welcome to Injury and Insult, America's CEOs and the Great Pandemic Plunder. On behalf of the Patriotic Millionaires and the Institute for Policy Studies, we are delighted to bring this content to you today. This is part of our Power and Money in America series. We have such a great hour in front of us, and so let me just give us a little bit of context. Inequality, the root cause of social unrest, is higher today in America than it has been in 100 years. About 44% of working people in America work in low-wage jobs that make about less than $12 an hour in some place like Beckley, West Virginia, and less than $20 an hour in bigger cities like San Jose, California. So workers aren't doing so great, but CEOs are just coming along just fine. In 1965, the ratio of CEO pay to worker pay was about 21-1. Today in America, it's closer to 320-1. And some CEOs are doing even better than that. The CEO of McDonald's last year made 1,200 times more than his lowest paid workers. You'll be shocked, I tell you, shocked to learn that a global pandemic that cost 500,000 people their lives and millions of people their livelihoods really didn't put much of a hitch in the giddy up of America's CEOs. Here to talk about all of this and unpack a fantastic new study is Sarah Anderson, who directs the Global Economy Project at the Institute for Policy Studies. You all, this study is going to make your head explode. And after her presentation, we'll be discussing all of this with patriotic millionaire Abigail Disney, a wonderful filmmaker and producer, with patriotic millionaire Dan Price, who's the CEO of Gravity Payments. He famously cut his pay by $1 million to give all of his employees a minimum of $70,000. And the wonderful CBS contributor and our great friend Jamal Simmons is going to moderate this discussion. So I'll kick it now to Jamal. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you so much, Erica. This conversation is one where I think everybody just really needs to dig in, because this is what's happening here is so important for the entire country. What I like to say is, I'm not against people making money. I want people to make money. I believe in capitalism. I think that it's the best way to organize an economy. I'm against people not making money. There ought to be a way for everybody in our economy to live a good life and to aspire and to be able to take care of themselves and their families and not be destitute. So that's what I'm for. And so I'm excited to hear about this conversation. I read the report. It is, as Erica said, it will blow your mind. We're going to get some highlights right now from Sarah Anderson, who's going to kind of walk us through this. But let me tell you how this is going to go. We're going to hear from Sarah. Then we're going to have a conversation among ourselves. You guys should enjoy and join in. So there's a chat function here. I want you to go to the chat and put in whatever your questions are. We'll kind of find the good ones that we think will work and get to as many of them as we possibly can. And then we'll have a good conversation. We'll wrap it up. So with that all being said for the ground rules, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Thank you, Jamal. It's so exciting to be here, and especially with Abigail and Dan, who bring such powerful perspectives to the issue of excessive CEO pay. My perspective is as someone who's been researching and developing policy solutions on this issue for more than 20 years, and I'm going to share now our new report, which is the 27th Annual Executive Excess Report from the Institute for Policy Studies. It's called Pandemic Pay Plunder. And not moving. I think I might have to back out of that a second. And get back in. As I said, this is our 27th annual executive excess report. And the sample that we used this year was the 100 S&P 500 corporations with the lowest median worker pay. And we chose this group because we were curious to see if these companies might have altered their pay practices in a year when frontline employees were demonstrating how essential they are to our democracy, our economy, and our public health. And what we found is that many of these companies did alter their pay practices, but mostly to inflate their CEO pay. So this is the key finding from our report. 51 of the country's 100 largest low-wage employers rigged pay rules to give CEOs a 29% average raise, while their frontline employees made 2% less. So what do I mean when I say that they rigged pay rules? Well, let me give you a few examples. Hilton, bad year for the hotel industry, no doubt about that. CEO Chris Nassetta did not meet the performance goals related to his multi-year stock awards. And so the board modified those awards by disregarding 2020 results from his performance evaluation and changing his performance metrics. So that boosted his pay to $56 million. Meanwhile, workers who were either laid off or having to go back into high-risk work situations were making $28,608 for the median worker at Hilton, and that made their pay ratio 2,000 to 1 between CEO and worker pay. And by the way, Hilton cut about 32,000 people from its global workforce in 2020. Let's look at another example, TYSON. As you know, meatpacking plants were COVID hotspots in many parts of the country last year. At TYSON, at least 12,000 employees got the infection, and at least 38 of them died from COVID. That was more than at any other meatpacking company. The executives didn't meet their maximum bonus targets, and so the board made up for that by giving them special stock awards. One of those lucky executives was John Tyson. He made $11 million last year as the chair of the board. It's hard to know why he needed a special boost. He's the heir to the Tyson fortune, and over the course of the pandemic, his personal wealth has increased 72% to $2.6 billion. Meanwhile, those workers going back into those very dangerous meatpacking factories were making $37,000 at the median for a pay ratio of about 300 to 1. At Chipotle, they moved the goalposts by excluding financial results from March, April, and May, and excluding COVID-related costs from the performance evaluation for their CEO. That boosted his total compensation to $38 million. Meanwhile, median worker pay at Chipotle was $13,127, and their pay ratio was almost 3,000 to 1. Now, Chipotle is one of those low-wage employers who offered a little bit of hazard pay at the beginning of the pandemic. Their average worker pay is $12 an hour, and they boosted that 10%. So workers taking great risks to go back into those restaurants were making an extra $1.20 an hour. You might have heard that yesterday Chipotle announced that they're facing a real staffing shortage, trying to staff up their restaurants, and so they're going to be increasing pay to an average of $15 an hour, not a minimum. And you have to think maybe they wouldn't be scrambling with a labor shortage so much if they treated their workers differently in 2020. So I could give you 48 more examples like this, but I want to pivot to policy solutions because I think a major message of our report is that we can't rely just on corporate boards to handle the issue of excessive CEO pay. We do need public policy, and our report has many CEO pay reform ideas. The one that I'm most excited about right now is the Tax Excessive CEO Pay Act. So what this bill would do is it would give corporations an incentive to narrow their divides by raising the tax rate on companies that have huge gaps between CEO and worker pay. So companies that pay their CEO more than 500 times what they pay their median worker would face the highest tax increase at 5 percentage points. Companies that pay their CEO less than 50 times their median worker wouldn't pay another dime under this bill. which, by the way, has been introduced in both the House and the Senate. So let's look at how this might have played out if the Tax Excessive CEO Pay Act had been in force in 2020. I pulled out 3 companies that were extraordinarily profitable in 2020: Walmart, Amazon, and Home Depot. They all had pay ratios far above that top rate, so they would have paid the highest tax increase. I should point out that the Amazon pay ratio here is based on their highest paid executive, who was not Jeff Bezos last year. It was another man who made $46 million, and that's how the bill would work. It would base it on the highest paid executive. So both Walmart and Amazon would have owed an extra $1 billion under this bill if it had been in force last year. That could have paid for 13,500 clean energy jobs or 150,000 public housing units. Home Depot would have owed an extra $800 million. That could have supported 18,300 jobs that pay $15 an hour. So the figures in this table assume that they didn't change their pay practices in response to the bill. And of course, we want companies to change their pay practices. So I'm going to end by just summing up what I think are 3 major benefits of the Tax Excessive CEO Pay Act. First, it would give an incentive to narrow gaps by raising worker wages and reining in CEO pay. We know, though, that not all companies are overnight going to get below that 50-to-1 threshold, so it would also generate significant revenue. $150 billion over 10 years is the estimate. And finally, as Dan will speak more about from his firsthand experience, it could make businesses more effective. There's a lot of research that shows that narrower gaps between CEO and worker pay really bring out the best in employees who feel like they're getting a fair reward for their labor. So I'll just end there and say I think it's time to stop tolerating a business model that creates obscene wealth for a few people at the top while leaving so many of the rest of us economically insecure. And I think the Tax Excessive CEO Pay Act is one thing that could help move us in the right direction. Thank you.
All right, Sarah, thank you so much for the background. I mean, when people who are on this Zoom dig into this report and really see more of the data that they've assembled and pulled together, I think it will gnaw at your belly. The way this is all structured. Dan, I wanna bring you in here because I think your story is the kind of story that gives some of us hope, right? That there's a way to have some conscientious capitalism that exists. And also, I'm going to start off with this question because what it appears to me that is the biggest flaw in the way things are set up right now is all the risk is on the side of the workers. It's not on the side of the executives who are making the most decisions, which seems like over the long term, that's going to corrupt the process of good decision making because people aren't really going to pay a price for making mistakes. Dan?
Jamal, you're exactly right. So just to kind of set up my story a little bit for people that don't know, I started a company, started building it when I was 17 years old. I grew up in a conservative Christian family in Idaho. I'm the 4th of 6 kids. And it was very much like a business first family where we just grew up thinking like, whatever you do to do a better job to support the corporation you're working for, like that's the right thing to do. If you need to work 18 hours a day, if you need to take a pay cut, just like very dedicated kind of family is how I was raised. And the kicker was I listened to Rush Limbaugh from 9 to 1 every day.
God bless you.
Yeah, you get kind of a feel for it, right? And I started building this business and eventually I started to get to know some of my employees and understand how difficult it was for them just to make ends meet. And one in particular, there was a woman named Rosita Barlow who was moonlighting at McDonald's to be able to afford to work at my company because she was so passionate about it. And she was turning down higher job offers and everything. And so, I felt like sort of like, like appreciative that she had that dedication. But I saw that negative effect that it had on her and her family for her to be in that sort of situation. So, I think, people say that CEOs and wealthy people are out of touch. I think that's true. And I think I'm trying to be less of an example of that. And so we started working on our pay. It became a big initiative for us as a company in 2012. We decided to start making, pay for employees one of our top goals as a company. And we were able to exceed 15 to 20% pay raises in 2012, 13, 14. But by 2015, the cost of living for our employees was going up by so much that gradual approach wasn't working. And so that's when I announced that I was cutting my own pay from $1 million a year to $70,000 so that all my employees could make at least $70,000 per year. Well, what happened when we did that? We went from having between 0 and 2 babies born per year at the company to we had 60 in the last 6 years. We also had a 10x boom in terms of people buying homes for the first time. The savings rate at our company tripled for employees saving money for retirement. And 70% of the company, 70% of employees at the company reported that they were able to pay down debt. So all the negative lines that are used in coffee shops against employees about how they'll just squander away extra money, they were all proven wrong, and we proved that it works. And then people say, yeah, well, what about the business? Well, our business tripled and our turnover rate crucially was cut in half, which means our employees were staying on average twice as long, and that saves the company so much money. It's been proven by, not necessarily people that are totally friendly to our cause when they study this, that when you cut the turnover rate, your efficiency and your effectiveness skyrockets. And so that was effectively, in a lot of ways, able to pay for the raises. So you say, wow, this sounds like a great kind of capitalist fairy tale. What's the problem? What's the catch? And there is a major catch, which is pretty much 0 big companies learned from what we did. We had a few messages from the likes of, some major corporations that kind of gave lip service to it and announced that they were raising their minimum wage, not to our $70,000, but maybe to $15. But those generally came with some pretty major downsides where they were, in some cases, hurting working conditions or just kind of catching up to where they weren't even, keeping pace with the cost of living increases over those periods of time. And what I learned is, unfortunately, our solution really doesn't work and didn't work. It works for us and it works for companies that are willing to try it. But systemically, unfortunately, there's a big pull that I think we have to acknowledge. And I think if we don't, we're going to be in great danger. We already are in great danger because there's sort of an easy way of doing things, which is laying people off, using all the pressure you can to pressure wages, pressure what you're paying your employees, and use that extra money to go into greater amounts of debt to fund things like stock buybacks, and forget about things like saving for a crisis for a company, forget about any of those things. And you're absolutely right in the point you made, Jamal, which is all the risk ends up being put on workers, because these companies get so comfortable with outsourcing jobs, with laying people off, with pushing down workers, with using all these forces to basically pressure the workers and put them in a situation where they're kind of stuck. They don't have enough time and energy to go out to the market and figure out what they're doing. And the companies are able to maintain the power. A perfect example of this is in the airline industry, but you could point to any industry where the amount of money that they made, they used to put 25% of that into things like stock buybacks. Now it's nearly 95%. Then we, as the public, bail them out whenever they get in trouble, and they still lay off employees. And so we've put this situation in place where we've allowed these kind of both lazy and also people that really are not risk takers on top. We've put at the top of our hierarchy the ability of wealthy people to achieve a 5% risk-free rate of return. In the religion that we all are a part of right now, the thing that is the most high, holy of holies, is a 5% risk-free rate of return for wealthy people at a time when workers struggle to get 1 or 2% gains to keep pace, and the minimum wage doesn't keep pace. And so systemically, if you can choose between an executive team that's going to cut corners to basically guarantee to get there, rather than innovate, rather than invest, rather than doing the sort of things that we've done at Gravity Payments, they're going to do that. And we're creating basically a monopoly bait and switch economy that has downstream negative effects on workers and also on consumers and everybody else, because it's basically just kind of disintegrating the innovative spirit that has created the myth of the American dream that we really have a responsibility to make a reality. So I'll say yes, we proved that it worked for us, but I think unfortunately, Jamal, we also proved that it's not going to work systemically, and we really need the types of reforms that Sarah is talking about.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, for that. I grew up in a house, if you look at Abigail Disney's picture, what you'll see is a wall full of books behind her, right? And I grew up in a house where my dad had a wall full of books like that. And on some of those books were these very futuristic, these futuristic stories about what would happen in the world when technology came in and we were all, the robots would come and software and all this. And one of the predictions in those books was that we would have this nirvana where people would have so much free time and there would be income and, it'd be like Star Trek. Everybody would just be, pursuing their own, creative and intellectual pursuits. That's not what happened, right? We got software, we got robots, but what happened is all the productivity gains that came from that technology all went to the most elite of the classes, and everybody else ended up taking all the weight of less work, less pay, all the things that Dan has been talking about. So Abigail, I kind of want to come to you on this because you are a member of a family that's a storied American family in business. And you think that the folks in your economic class actually are getting this wrong. Can you talk to us about how you came to that conclusion and what you think it is that's happening that's wrong and how we can do better?
Thanks, Jamal. And I just want to appreciate Sarah's work, which, my head was exploding too. And I want to appreciate what Dan had to say, because systemically this won't work unless the system changes, right? Because right now we're all working just for money and we think that corporations are just economic entities. But of course, what he just listed as his measures of success were things like his employees were having children and they were buying homes and paying down debt and saving for retirement. I don't understand why those aren't measures of success when we talk about what we've done as corporate animals. I've watched this change in a highly personal way over my lifetime. Of course, Disney's only had 4 CEOs in its history, right? It's had my Uncle Walt, who was a founder, and founders are very specific and particular people who don't necessarily always, Jeff Bezos notwithstanding, work for money. That's not why they're doing what they're doing. And they live in a perpetual state of risk. Risk is their whole essence. It's the water they swim in. My grandfather, of course, was the second CEO when my Uncle Walt died. He took over in 1966 and worked until he died in 1971. And when he died in 1971, the CEO pay ratio was 20-to-1. He also was a co-founder, and my grandmother told me that when she brought my father home from the hospital in 1930, she really wasn't sure where her next meal was coming from. They had already succeeded. They had already done a lot of things and were well-known makers, but they weren't really comfortable until they stopped having to leverage their entire lives up, which they did over and over again, all the way through until Disneyland was built in the 1950s. That was how they understood their commitment to the corporation they were building. I've met a woman whose first day of work, my grandfather was there, and he gave a little talk to the group of people there who were getting their orientation, and she raised her hand and she said, "Mr. Disney, I want to ask a question." My grandfather said, "You stop right there and call me Roy." Now, that sounds like just such a dumb thing, but that was how he understood the people who worked for him, that he didn't understand himself to be on some level above them. And what has crept into our understanding of the way corporations operate is a bit of a caste mentality. Not the caste mentality at Disney, they call themselves cast members. I mean, a different kind of cast with a
different point, yeah.
There is, what creeped in was this idea that there are these peons. They are people who work for an hourly wage. They aren't, they're not trying hard enough. They haven't availed themselves of opportunities. They're not really, achievers like us. They don't understand that everybody's a billionaire waiting to happen. They're just not trying hard enough. The people who choose to work in an hourly way. So when Michael Eisner stepped in leadership that's right. There was a CEO period in between Grandpa and Michael Eisner. Sorry about that. I always repress that part. But anyway, Michael Eisner came in, and one of the things he did on his way to becoming a poster child for excessive CEO pay in the 1980s and 90s was to repopulate the board of directors. And this is really important because this is a big piece of how the caste ideology hardens into a system of understanding and an entire social ideology among people at the very top. And they were very committed to the idea that people inhabiting the echelon, their cronies, were people who deserved different, tried harder, had arrived at a place that indicated what worthy people they were. And so they got in there and defended and propagated what it was that Michael Eisner was setting into motion. I call him the gateway CEO because he was the CEO before things changed under the Clinton administration. So he was getting big multi-million-dollar compensation, but they hadn't quite created the kind of compensation package that we're working with today. That happened in the 90s under the Clinton administration with some adjustments in tax rules. Most importantly, the idea that if your compensation was, quote, performance-based, then your company could write off all of the benefit package. Well, that's great. So now what you've done, it was meant to cap CEO pay, or it was meant to inhibit CEO pay from running away. But what it really did was create a consequence-free environment for boards to offer the moon, the stars, and the suns to their CEOs. What followed on that was a series of rationales, all of which are in Sarah's report. First of all, the idea that this makes me laugh, that CEOs are taking all the risk and therefore they deserve to be rewarded handsomely. Well, a few months ago and without a lot of fanfare, Bob Iger became a billionaire. This is a person who's a brilliant executive. I do not question his brilliance. He has done amazing things, but he came to work at a company. He pulled down his paycheck. He worked very hard. He advanced up the ladder. Like we know, white men tend to have fewer barriers to doing that, and ascended into the stratosphere. Congratulations to him. He never lived an instant of the kind of risk that my grandfather and my great uncle lived and understood. So this is not an argument that he is a less worthy person, but it does seem to me that there should be some relationship between the risk he has lived in his lifetime and the rewards that he's pulling down. The other thing that happened while he was ascending was, again, he repopulated the board. He repopulated the board with people who either had been or wanted to someday be CEOs like him. So what on earth is going to be their commitment to altering this ideology about what people deserve and who deserves to be really well rewarded than a bunch of people who are either already your peers or working really hard to become your peers? What has happened as a result of this shift in mentality is we have, first of all, populated the most powerful companies in the world with men and a handful of women. There's still more CEOs named John than women CEOs, but okay. With people who are working for money. They're not working because they love this business. They understand the heart and soul of what this thing is about. Dan runs a company that is about something. Yes, it's got the word payment, it's his title. It's an economic company, and it looks to make profits like any other company. But it also looks to make those profits by way of a system that enables small business people to get more justice in the process of what it is that they're trying to conduct their businesses around. You know, Disney was founded as a company with a set of soul ideas. You know, it was about bringing families together, about art, about achieving a kind of magic potion. Yes, I use the word magic. It's required of all Disneys and all times. That is like a cement for the families that participate in what Disney does. And the people who for decades, for generations, came to work at that company, came to work because they were committed to that same vision that my grandfather and my great uncle set out. They worked for more than money, but they have been systematically degraded, devalued, and dehumanized by the people who now run it. Because people at the top who've been rewarded, the word handsomely doesn't even begin to cover the way they've been rewarded, and this just isn't just the CEO. They've been rewarded obscenely, and they are interested in the soul part of the economy. So when Dan says it doesn't work systematically, this is partly going to be about legislation, but this is going to have to be about culture change. This is going to have to be about taking, sorry, I'm using now biblical terms, Baal, the false god that we've been worshiping, off of his whatever that thing is that idols stand on that I now forget the name of. 61 years old, my brain is
pedestal.
Kind of curdled.
Pedestal,
yeah, pedestal, that's the thing. We're going to have to dislodge him, and we're going to have to kind of re-understand the meaning of what it is to be economic animals, to pursue our livings, to pursue our destinies, to pursue the corporation. The corporation is the lifeblood of American life. And if what's in that blood is poison, we're a mess. If we don't add a soul component to the way we understand business, business will never change. And the people who run our businesses will never, ever change.
Thank you, Abigail. You know, one of the things that's happened over the last couple of generations as globalism has set into place is that we've removed people probably like your family who were CEOs who lived in communities and were part of communities. And so even when, whether you were Xerox in New York or, you know, Polaroid in Massachusetts or wherever you were based, I grew up in Detroit, so the big three auto companies. So you lived there and your company was based there, your employees were based there. And there's this idea of, it wasn't just, I think we've now gotten to the shareholder capitalism. I think what people are talking about is getting back to the stakeholder capitalism, right? Employees matter, customers matter. They're all the people who are engaged in your company, they all matter. So Sarah, I kind of want to get back to you on this because when we've been talking about how do we change this, Abigail talked about people stacking boards. You know, one of the things that's happened, I have a piece out called the 4% problem, which is about how African Americans top out at about 4% in leadership of our most pivotal institutions. 4% of corporate boards, 3.2% of CEO of C-suites, less than 1% of Fortune 500 CEOs. So part of the problem is the pathway for people who are not, frankly, white guys to get to these rooms is one, it's a prototypical path that doesn't allow a lot of variation to it. How is it that we can sort of make some changes in the way legally we put pressure on these decision makers to open up these companies to more of a stakeholder mindset and less of just let's just get the share price as high as possible so we can all cash out?
Yeah, it's extremely important. I mean, you mentioned those staggering numbers. Less than 1% of Fortune 500 CEOs are Black. I think 6% of those CEOs are women. And these boards are homogenous. We need diverse perspectives there. We need worker representatives on boards like they have in a lot of European companies that have much narrower gaps between CEO and worker pay. Not just a coincidence. I have a feeling. One way that we can use our power of the public purse is by putting conditions on government contracts to require government contractors to diversify their leadership, to do more reporting on race and other demographic equity issues within the companies. And we do have power that we can use to encourage that shift. Good investors want a diversified portfolio, right? Companies should want diverse perspectives. It would make them healthier in the long run.
Great. So you said, I'm going to stick with you for a second, because one of the things in the report that I thought was particularly momentous in this time period was when you talked about the hazard pay conditions that were put in place during the COVID quarantine and the pandemic that struck last year, and what's happened to this sense of we're all in this together during the quarantine and we're going to make these sacrifices and invest in each other to make it through. What happened to that over the course of the last year?
Yeah, by October, most of the companies that were offering that really small amount of hazard pay had terminated that. And so as the infection rates were rising in the fall, workers were having to go back into those dangerous workplaces with even the extra $1 or $2 that they had been getting. And I think this should have been a year for shared sacrifice. And instead it turned into a year of shielding CEOs from risk, while it was the frontline workers who really paid the price.
Okay, I want to encourage more people to ask questions in the chat. We'll get to you. Dan, let's go to you on this, because you're still running a company in the midst of what we're all going through. And one thing we have seen is that productivity gains have gone up, while labor costs have gone down, which says that perhaps software and robots and all that stuff is still having an impact during this time period. What's your advice to your fellow CEOs about not just what you did, but what they should do going forward to have more robust companies in this environment?
Well, I encourage CEOs to consider the fact that there are benefits to that lower turnover rate that we talked about, and that if they do create, as Abigail mentioned, a goal to have employees that can have a degree of health and freedom and dignity to their work, there are big payoffs. But I think the tough part is I don't think we're going to convince the CEOs, because I think systemically we're selecting for people that will not listen to that sort of a message. And so I really think the advice, more importantly, is to everybody that's not a CEO to stop trusting these people, stop trusting the system so much, and to create safeguards and accountability, because I think we've had far too long a mentality of let's ask wealthy people and CEOs to do better. And we've seen how basically they've been pitching us on trickle-down economics for the last 50 years. And we've shifted from pretty simply an environment that worked well for, as a model. It didn't work well for everybody, but 40, 50 years ago, economically, if you just look at the statistics, we were able to create a system where some people could kind of rise to the top. Now, we had all sorts of terrible, unjust, exclusionary policies and situations that were hurting people, but we had a 50 to 70% top marginal tax rate, and wage gains had doubled twice over a 20-year period. Think about that. And so there are countries that have been doing this the right way today. We've gotten it right as a model in the past. Of course, there were things that were horrible that we did back then as well, but it's pretty simple. And so if we can just set up that system again today with the types of policy changes that Sarah's recommending and has put forward today, I think we can get to that. So it's like, I think the advice that's more important is like, let's stop listening to the CEOs because they're lying to us.
Yeah, there's a great piece of research from some researchers from NYU and Columbia that for a long time there was concern about women being on boards. There was one woman on a board, and so everybody thought that was fine, but then people thought that wasn't enough. So then they started complaining about it. So then people looked around and they started putting 2 women on boards. So their thing was like, it went from being tokenism to toucanism. And at some point it'll be threecanism because people will realize that's important. But they only do as much, they will do as much as required, and then they'll stop acting as soon as people stop policing them. So you've got to, you know, there's got to be a sanction part of this fight. Abigail, there's a question from Heather Booth in the Q&A that I think is, I want to get your take on. This is terrific research and outrageous. For the solutions, what about also promoting a wealth tax, as Elizabeth Warren proposed, so that those with over $50 million in wealth would pay a 2% tax? How do you think that'll go over?
I think it's brilliant, and I think we should talk about it very seriously. I mean, the fact is that people have amassed this kind of wealth in part because taxes have been really low. Corporations have gotten away with a lot without regulation. They've been allowed to pay less and less to their employees. I mean, wealth shifted up to them as a result of a lot of different adjustments in regulations and taxes and other kinds of things. So the only way that we're going to re-shift back to the people who belong, who deserve to have this kind of money, is through the tax system. It was in large measure the government that pushed the money uphill. Now it's going to have to let it more naturally flow downhill. I hate the term trickle down, because a trickle, if you imagine you're really thirsty, is not enough. And it's not a fair amount of money. What we're talking about is, if there's an image about water, is there's a big giant lake like sitting at the top of a mountain, and it's been filling and filling and filling. And yet for some reason, what's trickling out of that lake is no more than really has been in the past. We need to bust that dam down and let the waterfall happen the way nature demands.
Hey,
Erica,
Jamal,
I think this is a good, go ahead, Dan.
on that 2%, I just want to break something down real quick because I think it's really important. There's two things that we currently are doing as public policy that we're not charging for. And I'm not sure we should be doing these things, but we are. Number one, we're providing an implicit guarantee to creditors of our largest corporations and their wealthy shareholders. I mean, we all know we've been doing that since 2008. Certainly in 2020, we proved it. That has an impact on the interest rates that those corporations pay. Then if we look at our monetary policy, our banking policy set by the Federal Reserve, that also has an effect of decreasing the interest rates that those corporations pay. If you look at the debt ratios and everything, that is providing more than 2% of an artificial lift on an annual basis to the wealth gains to our wealthiest citizens. And we're not charging anything for it. So even if we implement this 2% wealth tax, which would pay for a lot of good, or for people that say, hey, talk about modern monetary theory, it doesn't pay, but it's still, we have a responsibility to charge for that value that we're providing, and 2% is less than what we're currently subsidizing those wealthy people.
Erica, patriotic millionaires have been focused on taxing the rich. You guys have been talking about this all over the country, as it were. Can you talk to us a little bit? I was thinking about when Abigail was talking about the trickle, I was thinking about your marginal utility of money and why taking a little bit of money away from wealthy people isn't going to stop their ability to vacation on, super yachts. I think you're on mute.
We care so much about dealing with these folks that we just wrote a book called Tax the Rich, How Wise Loopholes and Lobbyists Make the Rich Even Richer. So you can learn more about that at taxtherich.com. So here's the thing. The marginal utility of money is a fantastic concept that basically says that each additional dollar that you have is worth less than all the dollars that came before that. So you would see at the study a few years ago that most Americans, a big percentage of Americans, couldn't come up with $400 in an emergency. Well, if you throw $400 to Abby, she probably isn't going to notice it. I mean, just let's be real. She's Abby, so she would notice it, and she'd probably give it to somebody amazing to do something great with. But leave that aside.
I was going to say I would take a bunch of my friends to a really fancy restaurant. But okay.
I want to go.
But people can't kind of get this. They think, well, money is always the same, but it just isn't. So the analogy to think of is pizza. If you haven't eaten all day long, maybe you went on a morning jog and now somehow your workday got away with you, it's 7:00 at night. Your friend comes home and brings you a hot, delicious piece of pizza. You eat that cheesy bite, so delicious. You eat it so fast, that you're still hungry, grab another piece, have that piece. So fantastic. Now somebody walks in with an entire large pizza. You're already a little bit full, but you say, I'll take that third piece and I'm going to save the rest for later for a snack. Then someone delivers you 1 billion pizzas. That's what money is like when you get to those places. These folks, these CEOs, just to wrap it all into a circle, Jamal, right? These CEOs, 181 of them, just insisted that the entire world would collapse if Joe Biden requires their corporations to pay their fair share of taxes to rebuild this country. Okay, 181 of them said it would crash the economy. A few dozen of those are folks whose corporations like FedEx and all of the rest of them didn't pay any taxes last year. If you mailed a package from FedEx last year, you spent more money than FedEx paid in taxes last year. And then, as Dan said, don't trust these people, okay? Because they're walking around telling everybody that they're job creators. They are not job creators. Consumer demand is the only job creator. Revenues come in, then you deduct expenses like payroll, and then you have your profit. It's not even on the same side of the equation. So they don't want to pay their fair share in taxes. They're trying to justify it all by saying that they are job creators. And they're going on TV every other day lying to the American people about how basic economics actually works. So we need to rein in this perception that they have created, that our health and well-being is somehow reliant on them. It is utter nonsense. And if we could achieve one thing in America today, it would be for the American people and politicians to quit listening to corporate CEOs and their K Street lobbyists. And let's get down and get some reasonable policies in place and build this country to where it needs to be.
Awesome. Sarah, I want to ask you a question from the Q&A. This is from Karen Dolan. She would like you to speak about how worker-owned companies might help transform this unequal system. Do you have any thinking about that in your research?
Absolutely. And I would say these worker-owned companies should be fighting for things like the Tax Excessive CEO Pay Act, because they're not going to be paying that extra tax. They tend to have very narrow gaps in pay levels. And in fact, I'll just mention that there are 2 cities now in the United States that are already generating revenue from taxes on these huge CEO to worker pay gaps. Portland, Oregon was the first one. And one of the deciding votes in passing that policy several years ago was a member of the council who had worked at a big cooperatively owned engineering company that had been extremely profitable, and he said kicked the butts of their competition. And he felt like he'd seen firsthand how a narrow pay gap had brought out the best in his colleagues. And so that is a model that I think we should be supporting, and that would benefit from a policy like this.
And Dan, how do you let's stay on this topic of worker pay, because someone else was asked here in the chat. Excuse me for missing your name, but here we go. Alan Channing asking the question about a role for organized labor. So we've seen, obviously the Amazon lost the fight to organize some workers. But is there a role, is there a role to bring back organized labor into companies that can help even the score up a little bit? Or how should we be thinking about that, unions?
Absolutely. And I think there's 2 levels to think about it. I think one, we need to have laws in place that protect people's right to organize, protect labor's right to organize. And then secondarily, I think we need to recognize the value that organized labor unions provide to all of us. And keep that in mind, some of the top union leaders on the planet that I listen to, they'll acknowledge unions aren't perfect because you don't have any institution that's perfect. And so we have this kind of weird thing that we do where we scrutinize labor unions and we scrutinize public entities, public good entities that we all own at a level where we don't scrutinize corporations. I mean, I recently put on Twitter and Instagram, a listing of the billions and billions of dollars that our health insurance companies in the United States have made recently. And can you imagine if that amount of money was going out the back door in a labor union or in a government entity, the scandal? But because it's a for-profit corporation that all of our healthcare depends on, that's denying us healthcare, they basically escape with zero scrutiny. So I think Abby's right about the cultural change, the cultural shift that needs to happen. And I think when we look at unions, I think we need to recognize that there are very broad powers that the corporations have. And so we need public entities and unions to basically help us fight back. And when a union fights for better pay, better working environment, safer working conditions, that doesn't just help the employees that are a part of that union. It actually helps all employees because it creates competition and allows employees that aren't unionized to benefit from the kind of way that that spreads throughout the economy. Same exact concept with the $15 an hour minimum wage, which I personally think should be between $25 and $35 per hour, because that's the amount that it would be set at if it had kept up with either productivity gains or CEO pay. That's the range that the minimum wage would be. $35 an hour is what our minimum wage is at $70,000 per year. It's about the same number. And so I think we have to recognize that we as a country are in a way a big labor union. And if we put in place a $25 an hour minimum wage, that has a similar effect. So we need to support unions, small, big, and then we also need to think of all of us as a union together.
Could I just add one thing here?
Sure.
We wanted to have a worker perspective as part of this panel, and we had identified a worker who was very eager to do it. It happened to be someone who was in the middle of an organizing drive at a big company, and that worker had to pull out at the last minute because the company escalated intimidation tactics against the person and others. And to me, that just says so much about the stories that aren't getting heard and why we have this extreme disparity. And it's something that the Amazon fight in Alabama put a spotlight on. So we know about it, but it's happening to a much greater extent than we even realize.
You know, in so many ways, it's like we're going back in time as a country. You know, we've got to deal with the trust issue with some of the big tech companies that we were, dealing with the turn of the 19th century, beginning of the 19th century. My grandfather was a sanitation worker and was involved in the union there. I helped him go to law school. He actually went to law school as a garbage truck worker and we represented labor unions. And I think the pain that they felt in that period in the 30s and 40s when they were literally fighting, fighting companies on the Battle of the Overpass and all those sort of things. It feels like we're coming back into that era. And so, Abigail, I want to kind of circle back to you before we have to start to wind this down. So Paul Finnegan is asking here about legislators. I mean, one of the ways these things get fixed is because we get laws in place from whether it's a president and legislators in Congress, governors. As you give money, public activists, talk to people, are there legislators and politicians that you think get this and that they're trying to fix some of these questions? So Paul Finnegan asks, who are the key legislators in Congress support proposed laws imposing taxation on excessive CEO and worker pay and worker restrictions?
Right. There are great legislators. We need more of them. We need them to really move into critical mass on this question because we don't quite have them all the way. We have a lot of if this is a left-right issue, which I don't think it should be, we have a lot of Democrats who claim to be liberal who are not supportive of these kind of things, and they fall into the trap that Dan was talking about just going to the CEOs and asking them how it should work when they are not the people we should be appealing to for answers to this question. So Warren and Sanders in the Senate, fantastic on these questions, and I think they're really leading, and I think that they're really pushing thinking out into the public eye that was anathema just 10 years ago. So they're changing things. Even if they never passed any legislation, they would be changing things by changing the discourse. Ro Khanna is another guy who I think is brilliant and has been talking about a lot of these things in great terms. And of course, AOC and many of the progressives in the House are really on the right side of this question. And he's right to ask about legislators because Dan talked a little bit about how CEOs lived in their communities and all that kind of thing. I'm really well versed in what's happened in Anaheim in the last 60, 70 years. And, Disney has bought and paid for the town of Anaheim and its entire city council. To give you an example of the kind of thing they do, when a progressive named Jose Moreno ran for the city council, they worked so hard to prevent him from winning that they actually found another person named Jose Moreno to run against him. That is the kind of thing we're talking about here. There are streets in Anaheim that have not been paved since before Disneyland was built. There was a race riot in Anaheim, and some of the news footage, you can see the Matterhorn in the background. So that is what a company town really looks like, when there's a real capture. And in a lot of ways, America has become a company town in terms of the way our lawmakers have been captured. We, who are progressive, who have access to resources, really need to deploy a lot of money into two things. One is electing good people, and the other is to put an end to our capacity to elect people. Because that's really the only thing that's going to change this for good.
I think too, because I think that's such a good point about left and right. I think we need to remember that a lot of the worst offenders with what we're talking about are Democrats. I come from Idaho. I said from a conservative Christian family. So if somebody from Idaho is being lectured about how they're not this or that enough in terms of, learning and progressing as a society the way we all should, but that person is the person that's lecturing them that they're not a good person, is taking their job away, taking jobs away from Black people, taking jobs away from women, not supporting people that they claim to be uplifting and supporting. That person in Idaho, is also kind of being marginalized in a way. And, I think we need to take that into account when we frame our political discourse. A lot of this stuff, and I hate to say it, the worst offenders that are the most hypocritical oftentimes are Democrats.
Erica, Morris Pearl, who helped write the book with you, Tax the Rich, he talks about a few years ago, there was an article about how we've gone to this airport lounge kind of class system, the people who frequent airport lounges, and how if you go to airport lounges, you'll find yourself running into people You're like, oh, how random. I ran into somebody from school. It's actually not that random, right? But as Morris says, the real rich people, they aren't in the airport lounge. They're in the private hangar at the private jetway. So Mary Ann Howland asks, maybe we need to take money out of politics. Corporations are paying politicians for freedom to continue these horrible practices. Where do you stand on that as somebody who really works with these patriotic millionaires every day?
Oh, listen, it's basically an oligarchy with unlimited bribery, as President Jimmy Carter described it. Things have gotten really bad, and the number of $5,000 PAC checks flowing into, Senate offices right now would turn anyone's stomach. So there are two big pieces of reform legislation moving now. HR 1 in the House has passed. It's now stuck in the Senate. And this would be a whole host of reforms that would really deliver power to the people and pull money out of the system. Those are the two things that need to happen. Each individual needs to have a greater level of political power, and the people with all the money need to have substantially less. S1, we need basically 11 votes. So I put in the chat, call your senator. That is the hotline to the U.S. Senate. I always like to lob a call in once a week or so, kick that activism up. So it would be great to call your senator today and say, we've got to reform this system. I'm tired of living in corrupt America.
Boom. There we go. So I think that takes us to the end of our hour. Is that right? This has been a great conversation. Sarah, I want to finish with you because I do want to give you one chance before we close out. You've done all this work. Is there anything else in this, in the research that you found that you want to make sure people hear and know about before we take off today?
Well, I would encourage people to take a look at the whole report. I gave just 3 examples of companies and how they rigged the rules to pump up CEO pay while their workers were suffering in the crisis. But there are many more stories exactly like those. It was hard to pick just 3. And I hope maybe they'll make people mad enough to call up their member of Congress and also push the Tax Excessive CEO Pay Act. And I think this is an issue that cuts across the political spectrum. I think it doesn't matter if you're Democrat or Republican. People are really fed up with overpaid CEOs, and especially during a pandemic, this is the time to really stand up and do something about it.
And this metric, I just want to finish with this. CEO pay went up 29%. Employee pay went down 2% over the course of the last year, right? That is just, I mean, we're not all in this together. I think that's my last fundamental point. We are not all in this together. Okay. Thank you all for being here. This was, I think, a great conversation, and everybody can get more of this. Go to Patriotic Millionaires, CEO Pay, and there are lots of links in the chat here for where you can get more of Sarah's report, which is linked here, as well as Tax the Rich, which is the Patriotic Millionaire book. So thank you all for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye.
Jamal.